Hey guys, Elizabeth here from Plant-Based Bride, and today is the first of many self-care Saturdays. So you may have gathered from the title that this is going to be the first episode in a series I'm calling Self-Care Saturdays, and it's something that I'm going to be doing for the foreseeable future. So my plan for the series is to put up a new episode every other Saturday to continue my journey with self-care and take any of you who are interested or need this along with me so that we can go through our journey of self-care together and really develop a system that works for all of us individually. So today's video is going to be a little bit longer than probably any of the other videos, and that's because I want this video to explain kind of my whole idea behind this series and how it's going to work, but then I'm also going to get kind of in detail about my mental health story, which obviously you know from the title of this video, and that's going to take a little bit longer than probably any of the other episodes to get through. So first of all, I just want to say self-care is something that I think is very important, not just for any of you who may have had challenges with your mental health as I have, but just for people in general, and especially for activists. As I'm sure many of you know, it can be very trying to be standing up for what you believe in against huge numbers of people who just don't understand or are vehemently against what you're saying. And it can really take a toll on you to feel as though people aren't listening, or to feel like you're isolated, or whatever other feelings you have surrounding your activism and your identity as an activist, whether that be as a vegan activist for animals, or if you're a feminist, or if you're fighting for racial equality, if you're part of the LGBTQ community and fighting for recognition and trans rights and rights to marriage for everyone, and whatever it is that you are fighting for, it can be difficult and it can have a toll on yourself if you don't make sure to take care of yourself. And I think it's a really good thing to remember that you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. And I completely understand that it's hard to do that. I have put myself aside for years, believing that my well-being was not nearly as important as the well-being of the animals or the people that I was fighting for. And I've now realized that I can't maintain that level of fight without taking care of myself too. So that's kind of what this series is about. It's for everyone and anyone who feels like they could benefit from self-care. And really, first and foremost, I'm doing this for me because I really need to prioritize self-care in my life. And I know that holding myself accountable and sharing it with others is really going to help me to prioritize it and make it as important as it needs to be for me. So for anyone who's not really familiar with self-care, it's really just the idea of taking care of yourself, of doing things that allow you to live a fuller life. And that really covers a huge amount of topics and activities. And that's kind of why I feel like this series is going to go on for quite a while, because each episode I'm going to talk about a different aspect of self-care that I want to try out and explain what it is, why it's helpful, and how I'm going to apply it into my life for the next 2 weeks. And then in the following episode, I'm going to recap it, talk about what I did, how well I did keeping up with the things I was trying to do, and how they affected my life, whether it be positive or negative or negligible. So if you have any suggestions for things you do for self-care that you find really helpful, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll be sure to add those into the list of topics I want to cover if it's not something I already have. And so now that I've sort of explained the idea behind this whole series, I guess it's time to talk about why I personally need self-care, and that is through telling you all my mental health story. This is hard for me to talk about. The only people I've really told all of this to are my husband. He was actually the first person I told any of this, and then my immediate family and a very few friends. So this is new for me, but anyway, let's get into it. History for me, I was always a pretty emotionally charged child. I was never diagnosed with anything as a kid. I was very sensitive, I was very emotional. I would have pretty extreme mood swings. I'm sure my family looked at me as a very difficult child. I was also hugely perfectionistic, which I still am. I was very, very hard on myself, and I expected a lot of others. I felt everything really strongly, and I wasn't really the happiest kid, but I didn't really think about it that much at the time. I thought it was sort of normal. I definitely felt a little bit like a loner, and left out of things, but I was also a major introvert, so I thought maybe that was part of it. I've always had an inability to really handle my emotions, I guess, but it never came to a head until I had graduated college, and I had a pretty hard time in college, to be honest. I'm sure a lot of people have. I don't look back on a lot of my college experience with fond memories. I found it very, very difficult. I went through a lot, and by the time I graduated, I was feeling pretty raw and a little bit lost, as I'm sure a lot of graduates do when you're just first going out into the world. And about 6 months after I graduated, a pretty traumatic event happened in my life, and it destroyed me. At the time, it really kind of ripped my life apart, and I wasn't sure what to do, and it ended up causing me to realize that I was an atheist. I hadn't really believed in God for probably a pretty long time before that, but I'd never really considered it. And then after this event, it just sort of left me realizing that I didn't believe in God anymore. And that was a pretty big shift for me, to move from someone who had grown up within Christianity to all of a sudden just not have that part of my life. And while I knew that it was the truth for me and that I didn't believe in God and I didn't want to continue pretending to believe in something I didn't believe in, it definitely had a toll on me, because I felt as though I'd lost something that I'd been connected to. And shortly after this time, I had been vegetarian. I went vegetarian the day I graduated college. So I'd been vegetarian for about 6 months when this event happened. And then a couple months later, after all of this turmoil of trying to figure out what I was doing with my life and becoming an atheist, I had learned all this information about what happened in the dairy industry and for egg-laying hens, and I decided to go vegan. So while I was already in this crazy time and I was dealing with all of these things and so stressed out and so emotionally raw, I then discovered all of this completely horrifying information about how badly animals were being treated, and it just ripped my heart apart. And I went vegan. I knew I had to. There was no question about it, but I felt really emotionally affected by all the things I'd learned, and I'd already been in this kind of dark, weird place, that it left me in a pretty weird spot. At this time as well, I was going to the gym regularly. I actually had a personal trainer. I've always dealt with pretty severe body dysmorphia, and at the time I'd gained maybe 15 or 20 pounds while I was at college, eating really unhealthy food, drinking lots of alcohol, and I'd lost a tiny bit of weight after school as a vegetarian, but I really wasn't working out, and I wasn't dancing, which was something, for those of you who don't know, I'm a dancer, and I was dancing a lot before I went to college, and then once I was in college, I was still dancing, 1 class a day or whatever it was. But after college, I didn't have the money to go to a lot of classes, and I wasn't doing any other exercise. So I hadn't really lost any weight, and I was feeling self-conscious about being a little bit heavier than I was used to. So I decided to go to a gym. And while I was training with this personal trainer a couple times a week, I think we were doing 3 times a week, I decided to go vegan, and he didn't really know anything about veganism. He thought I was kind of crazy for going vegan, but he respected my choice. And we just kept training. And once my period with training with this guy was over, I kept working out for a bit, and I had lost weight over the course of these couple months. I'd lost fat, I'd gained some muscle, I was liking how my body was looking. I'm not really sure what triggered it, but I started to feel pretty desperate to lose kind of those last 10 pounds or whatever it was. I had started weighing myself more while I was training with this trainer to track my progress. I was measuring myself, I was counting calories, and all of these things led me to develop an eating disorder. About 6 months, 7 6 months or so after going vegan was sort of the darkest time for me. And I don't think it was related to being vegan at all. It wasn't a matter of feeling like I was restricting myself. I think my connection to my body and my body dysmorphia had been an issue for a long time. And a lot of you who are dancers are probably aware of how hard it can be to be in a room with lots of women or girls who are dressed in skin-tight clothing and constantly comparing yourself to others, constantly being measured for costumes, constantly using your body and seeing your body as your art form. It can really mess with your perception of your body. And it just kind of came to a head. I had gotten to the point where, again, I had been dealing with all of these things, and I was feeling still pretty torn apart from what had happened before I went vegan, that event. And I felt like really my only worth was my body, what I could do with it as a dancer, as a performer, and what it looked like. And I felt like if it didn't look better, if I wasn't skinnier, I wouldn't be able to do the one thing that I still felt like I had, that I cared about, which was performing. I wanted to still be able to perform at something that I always loved, and I felt like if I didn't lose weight, I couldn't do it. I felt like under all this pressure of auditions and everything, that the only reason I wasn't getting chosen over someone else was because they were skinnier than me. Anyway, I don't want to get into a lot of details of my eating disorder. I don't want to trigger anyone, but essentially for probably what ended up being 4 or 5 months, I was pretty deep into my eating disorder. And I didn't tell anyone. One or two people commented on me looking great, but nobody realized there was anything wrong. My mother, by the end of this period when I lost the most weight and was quite thin, my mom was asking me if I was okay and commenting on how thin I was. And I would just get really mad at her and say I was fine, and why couldn't she let me be happy with my body and all of this stuff, and wouldn't accept her help or her concern. And eventually I found Freely, and I started listening to her videos about raw till 4 and eating as much as you want and all of this stuff. And while I don't eat a raw till 4 diet now, and I don't believe that you should just pound in the calories at all, her approach gave me hope that I could stop this cycle that I was in, and I could not gain all of that weight back, because I was terrified to gain weight, but I also hated what I was doing to myself. That raw till 4 diet and that high carb lifestyle, which is still something I follow now, that's what helped me pull myself out of my eating disorder. And I'm so thankful to Freely, if not for anything else, that her videos helped me to stop this cycle of destruction that I was inflicting upon myself. So by the time I'd come out of all of these things I was doing to myself from my eating disorder, it was about a year after said traumatic event had happened. And as I came out of my eating disorder, I started feeling a lot better. I felt a lot lighter. I felt like I had more energy. I had a brighter outlook on life, and I started to feel like all of these negative feelings I'd had were because of that event that had happened and because of my eating disorder, and that there was nothing else wrong, that it was just, these outside sources. And now that I'd mostly recovered from my eating disorder and that this event was a year in the past, that I would be fine. I just kind of went along my merry way. Oh, I should also say, while I was in the depths of my eating disorder, my dog passed away, and she was my best friend for a very long time, through my childhood of being spending a lot of time alone and being really emotionally confused. She was the one that I could always talk to and always supported me, and maybe that sounds crazy to some of you, but for some of you who have had really deep relationships with non-human animals, I'm sure you get it. So Kessie was everything to me, and when she passed away and I was in the depths of my eating disorder, it really just exploded everything. So I forgot to mention that. That's when that happened. So I felt like everything was behind me at that point, but it wasn't. Yeah, so it was probably 8 months or so after I recovered from my eating disorder that I met my husband, Jason. And when we met and we started to talk and I realized I could literally talk to him about anything, I opened up about my eating disorder, and he was the first person I told about it, and he was telling me about what he'd been through in his life. And the fact that I felt like I could be so open with him and that I could tell him anything I thought ever and how I was feeling led me to realize eventually over the course of a couple months that maybe I wasn't as recovered from my eating disorder as I thought, and maybe the things I was feeling weren't just normal feelings, and maybe I actually was suffering from something. So at this time, I got a contract to work on a cruise ship, and I left Jason for 6 months to go work on that cruise ship. And it definitely didn't help to be away from him for that long, and being on the ship was hard for lots of reasons, which I don't want to get really into, but I had a tough time on that contract, and I met a lot of people I really care about. I had a wonderful time in a lot of ways, so many new experiences. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it definitely triggered some things in me that I had kind of thought I'd left behind. So I got back from the cruise ship, and at first everything was just amazing. I was back with Jason, and we got engaged, and then we went to Costa Rica and spent a month there together, and it was so wonderful. And then we came home and we moved, which, as many of you know, is one of the most stressful things you can possibly do. Then we were back home, and I didn't have really any particular direction, or I didn't feel like I had a lot of purpose in my life. I started my blog and felt really passionate about it, but at the same time I was just feeling really anxious, and kind of more anxious than I'd ever felt before. I was getting pretty severe anxiety about talking on the phone or leaving the house for any reason. And at the time I was unemployed. I was living off savings from my contract and just working on my blog, and I just started not doing anything. Like for days at a time I would just not do anything, and it started to become a really big issue. And I realized I had to get a job, I had to get out of the house. So I did that. I started working a lot, and for a while it felt like it was getting a bit better. And then it started getting worse, and I just wasn't feeling very good, and I was feeling a lot of anxiety. I was feeling really low moods, and Jason encouraged me to go to therapy and see if talking about it could help. And so I did, and I went to therapy pretty frequently for a couple of months, but I found that the stress of how expensive it was to go to therapy almost completely undid all of the good things that I got from talking to someone about how I felt. I was feeling a lot of stress about the world, and I felt like all of the problems of the world were on my shoulders. I was feeling a lot of activist burnout, in addition to just my general symptoms of anxiety and feeling really low. And so I was in therapy for a while, and it got to the point where I was pretty dark. I was in a really, really dark place around Christmas and January this past year, so just under a year ago now. I was in a really, really dark place, and I went to go see my general practitioner, my family doctor, and told her how I was feeling, and she diagnosed me with severe depression and anxiety and put me on an antidepressant, an SSRI, and that helped for sure. I was in just such a dark place, and it really helped me to kind of take a step back and figure out how to just keep living. Not that I wasn't suicidal, thank goodness, but I just couldn't function. So the medication really helped me in that way, that it just kind of lifted the cloud a little bit so that I could actually do things with my life. And then I got a second contract on a cruise ship. It was just a short one, replacing somebody. While I was there, I felt okay emotionally, and I came home and I was working, and then it came up to the last couple of months up to my wedding, and I was so excited, but I was also so anxious. There was so much to do. I was so stressed out. I had 3 jobs at the time in addition to my blog, in addition to planning my wedding, and it was just so much. I was so anxious, so stressed all of the time, and the wedding was perfect. It really was like just the perfect day, but the week leading up to it was one of the most stressful weeks I've ever had. So after the wedding, we came back and it was just the crazy time. I work at a costume shop, and Halloween is the craziest time of the year, and I was working so much, more than full-time hours, and just so overwhelmed by everything. And I completely stopped taking care of myself. I stopped working out altogether. I stopped doing any kind of self-care that I had been doing, and I've just kind of fallen back, I feel like. Just that kind of drop from the excitement of the wedding and taking self-care off of my priority list has left me feeling less than awesome. Right now I'm actually tapering off my medication, and as I taper off my medication, I want to start implementing self-care back into my life. I think it's really important. I was definitely feeling better when I was trying to be more active in my own self-care, and I think as I taper off the medication, which I'm doing because I never even wanted to take medication really in the first place, I just needed something, and it helped lift that cloud. But I do not want to be on medication. I very strongly do not want to be on medication. So I'm trying to taper off it to see how I feel and if it's manageable. And I really think self-care is going to be so important for success in this area. So that is my really rambly mental health story. So I have recovered from an eating disorder and am currently still facing depression and anxiety on a daily basis. So that's where I'm coming from for this, as well as an activist who definitely gets activist burnout for sure. And so that's what this series is about. That's what I want to do with this series. And for week 1, what we're going to do is really, really basic. I'm going to put aside 10 minutes a day, every single day for the next 2 weeks, to do research and to educate myself. So I'm going to educate myself more about the specific eating disorders I struggled with, about body dysmorphia, about social and generalized anxiety, and about depression. I'm going to read up on them. I'm going to do research and just try to learn as much as I can about what I'm facing so that I can go from there. Because I really think that being educated is really just the first step for anything. So if you're following along with me on this journey, then that's my advice to you, is to take these 2 weeks as a chance to look within yourself and outwardly and do research and learn about what it is that you're dealing with, and try to gather information so that you're not just shooting in the dark trying to fix something that you haven't defined. So again, the way I'm going to do that is take 10 minutes a day and focus in on it and make sure that I'm dedicating these 10 minutes to reading an article or just doing a little bit of research, and see how that helps me if I feel more empowered in 2 weeks' time, having really focused on learning all I can about these conditions that I am facing. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I apologize for the length of it and the heavy subject matter. If any of you are interested in this series, let me know in the comments below. Again, if you have any tips or tricks, things that you found really helpful in the area of self-care, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear it. As I said, I am doing this first and foremost for myself because I need to, and I'm hoping that in sharing this, I will keep myself accountable and also hopefully help even just one of you to do the same and put yourself first and put your health and well-being first. So that was the first episode of Self-Care Saturday. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you very soon in my next one. Bye guys.